Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, and welcome to another session of the Doctor's Lab with Dr. Khalid Green and myself, Dr. Abdul Haqq Baker. We are going to continue what we started from 2 weeks ago with regards to the contribution of Salafism and its impact in the West. And on this particular occasion, we're going to continue looking at that, and we're going to be looking at the good, the bad, and the ugly. And what do I mean by that? Salafiyah, as we've mentioned, Salafism in itself, we will not have any criticism as Salafis about Salafiyah because we believe and equate that to Islam in and of itself. However, as I mentioned 2 weeks ago, Khalid and I agreed on this, as Salafis are trying to adhere to these precepts, we fall short. Just as I gave the example that when we talk about Islam, many a time we speak to non-Muslims and we say, don't judge Islam by the Muslims, because many look at what Islam stands for. Wa alaikum salam, Sister Kira, welcome back. So with that caveat, I want us to be really, really aware of where this discussion is going. Wa alaikum salam to you all who are joining us. So first I'll hand back over to Khalid and let him introduce himself and come in onto the show, so I don't hog the mic, as we say. So assalamu alaikum, Dr. Khalid.
Wa alaikum salam rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Hayyakum Allah. So this is a very very important topic, and that's why we've decided to continue, because also the last time we had a lot of questions interjecting, and we tried to address some of them in comments. But yeah, we felt it was necessary to continue on with the topic, and definitely we have a lot to unpack it. So let's get started.
Jazakallah khair. Yeah. And I think one of the criticisms that I think we need to look at and address, many say that when there's a critique of a particular strand, whether it be Hanafiya, we're Hanafis, we're Shafis, we're Malikis, we're Hanbalis, as we saw in history, you had those subscribing to those particular madhahib defending their particular madhahib in that instance. And I was reading, going through again the evolution of fiqh, Bilal Phillips, but I think is very, very informative in this regard. And it speaks about that factionalism. And unfortunately, that's still with many of us today, that while we will receive criticism, we quickly deflect or defer and say, well, other groups are doing that as well. And we may become sloganistic, Khalid, on referring to sound precepts and edicts and foundational aspects of the deen to rebut or rebuff others, to say, well, yeah, okay, our madhab, our group may have these issues, but they're correcting this, and what about everyone else? And I think that I want to move beyond that, because I feel that it detracts from the efficacy and the focus of what is actually correct and the overwhelmingly positive aspects of Salafism in itself. And I'll refer back to what I read from that Salafism in America paper last week, just 2 weeks ago, in which it says, the subtitle is Scholarly Views of Salafism in the West. And they're talking about Western scholasticism in that instance. Shedi's asking about a short, concise explanation of Salafism. And what I'll do, I'll read this and I'll let Dr. Khalid give that very concise summary just to place it in its perspective. So what is said here by this academic: while many Western governments have concluded that illiberal and conservative religious beliefs are problematic and linked to terrorist activity, there is far less agreement among commentators, scholars, and analysts. For some, any focus on Salafism is a red herring, based on a misunderstanding of radicalization and factors behind jihadism, as they call it. Conservative Salafism, they argue, is not a sign of radicalization, nor a pathway to violence, and must be seen as a separate force. It must be seen as separate from violent extremism. This is an important point to consider. It is worth noting that there are several groups that can be described as militant Islamists, such as the Taliban, Hamas, and Hezbollah, that while highly socially conservative, do not adhere to the Salafi movement. So this is a Western perspective, but it's accurate in its sense that basically saying that focusing on Salafism, as has been done overwhelmingly now, when conflating it with non-violent extremism, violent extremism, is actually a red herring. And I think this is a good point for me to stop and for you to answer this individual's question on just giving a concise summary of what is Salafism.
Well, you know, it's very relevant to actually the first quote I was going to come up with, bring anyway. So a great scholar, he's from the southern part of Saudi Arabia. May Allah have mercy upon him. His name was Sheikh Ahmed An-Najmi. And he said, associating to the Salafi dawah. So, you know, we're talking about a certain propagation to Islam, an orientation, if you will. He says, associating to Salafi dawah means adhering to what the companions of the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam were upon, and to the path of Ahl Hadith. Ahl Hadith refers to those who traverse the path of the Salafi minhaj. Salafism is the belief in the divine names and attributes of Allah, belief in divine destiny, and in the status of the companions. So that was a very kind of a concise, but or maybe perhaps it's general in some sense, of some of the precepts of Salafism. Salafism is just a call to the pristine call of Islam. You know, how it's calling to the Quran, the Sunnah, and the methodology of approaching the Quran and the Sunnah that the companions radiyallahu ta'ala anhum ajma'in were upon. And there's so much we can say about it, but that's just in short, in some. And of course, other groups will claim that too. And, and that's even a bit of what we'll probably talk about. But one of the things I want to mention is a principle I've mentioned prior. It's a fiqh principle, and that is al-ibra bi haqa'iq laysa bi musammiyat, that the reality of something is in its substance, not in its name. So if someone claims they're Salafi, or they claim they're Sufi, or they claim they're Hanafi, they claim they're this, they claim they're that, it's really in their substance of their practice and their belief. What do they believe? Is it consistent to what the Quran and the Sunnah, those revelations, that revelation, what is it consistent with revelation? Is it consistent with the way that the companions, radiyallahu ta'ala anhum ajma'in, how they approach the deen? Okay, and we could give a lot of examples, but we don't want to go. We've done it over so many podcasts, but that hopefully that gives us some insight.
Alhamdulillah, and I think that's just after I care for that. I think that what the question, someone came up and asked about madkhalism as a phrase. Do you see that as the ugly side of Salafism in the West? And I'm going to speak specifically to that. I don't use the phrase madkhalism in that particular instance, but if you're referring to particular elements that adhere to or follow blindly, I would add, Dr. Khalid may disagree with me, but blindly adhere to a particular scholar, Sheikh Rabi bin Hadi al-Madkhali, who I know, and mashallah, hafidahullah. If we're speaking to that, yes, then I would say that there are elements in the West that blindly follow the Sheikh, and some of the things that are even so-called attributed to the Sheikh are not attributable to him. But that does not excuse, or that does not minimize some of the things that we know that they are adhering to in directives from the Sheikh. But I'm not going to speak in that instance. I'm going to speak about them. And there is a fanaticism, there is a cultism that is there. There is a blind following that is even more reprehensible than reprehensive than what we've seen and what we criticize those who adhere and practice taqleed of the former madhahib today. That is an issue in itself, and that is an ugly side. There is an ugly side to us in our behavior as Salafis, and this is me saying this as a Salafi. I would say, Dr. Khalid, and some will disagree with this, some of the most the negative behavior amongst us in the West as an ummah has come from some of our co-religionists and those who I would say are Salafis in themselves as well. And I'm not going to suddenly flip that and say, but there are others who have bad behavior and everything like that. No, because we're talking about the contribution of Salafiyah in the West. Again, in saying that now, the behavior of us in pockets, collectively, individually, should not detract, should not minimize or obfuscate the contributions that are, again, I said 2 weeks ago, overwhelmingly positive with regards to the impact of Salafiyah in the West, Salafism in the West. And where do I speak to that in this instance? I speak about the effectiveness of Salafism and the Salafis who are involved in this remit, this realm, in combating violent extremism. And this statement, Kira, as an Algerian, talking about Salafism brings to me terrifying memories. I'm sorry to say that. No, Kira, thank you for raising that. But then my question would be, you've heard what Dr. Khalid has just mentioned then. Is it a title that those who they labeled themselves as, but in essence were not practicing Salafiyah? Daesh, ISIS called themselves Salafi. We have other, and I'm going to let you come in, Khalid, on this very shortly. ISIS called themselves Salafi. Al-Qaeda called themselves Salafi.
I don't think they call themselves Salafi.
And when you look at what takes someone out of Salafiyah, Sister Kira, you will understand that they are not Salafi, okay? Because some of the ideology that they hold and the subsequent practices that they held divorce them from Salafiyah completely. But that an understanding of what Salafiyah would needs to be there to understand that. So, for example, you've got the Buddhists. You have some of these Buddhist monks who were committing atrocities in some of the lands that they were actually in. And if you look at the tenets of Buddhism, you'll have others who are Buddhists saying, this is not from Buddhism. They are not Buddhists to be practicing this. If their ideology espouses these beliefs, they have divorced themselves. They've nullified the precepts of Buddhism in this particular instance. So, Sister Kira, thank you for bringing this. And it's an important question. And I'm sorry that you've had these terrifying memories. But those who have masqueraded as Salafis in Algeria or wherever, and we've dealt with them. We had to deal with some of them in the UK who were espousing some of these beliefs. They were not Salafi. Be clear, they were not.
Yeah. And that goes back to what we said. It's not in a name, because I know in the Algerian context you had the group. I think they're called the Salafist Organization for Combat and Jihad. Was a very famous group there, and they have another name. And one of our great imams, Imam Al-Albani, he dealt with them in his time, and others, in debating these types of debating these ideologies, which were false and false ascriptions. And many of our scholars have written extensively in dealing with and distancing Salafiyah from these people who have these misnomers like Salafi jihadist, Salafi takfiri, Salafi mubtadi'i, Salafi hizbi, whatever, all these groups. This also goes into what you were talking about, Doctor, about the about medkhalism. Okay, about saying this term. This is a term I find quite detestable and reprehensible. But what I will say is that no doubt it's not anything, even though our context is the West, but this is something that's been going on for a long time. We've had individuals and groups of individuals who have blindly followed Sheikh Rabi and others mashayikh. You know, it doesn't really matter who the name is. It doesn't matter if you say Abu Hanifa, Imam Abu Hanifa, or you say Sheikh Rabi, or you say Imam Malik, or you say Imam Ahmed, or you say Imam Barbahari, or you say Imam whoever, or Imam Fawzan. There are people, you're always going to find a group of people who blind follow and don't represent necessarily what the Sheikh is propagates, or at least not holistically. So this has been something which has been an issue. And what was interesting, this is from my experience when I was in Medina. I remember a talib al-ilm, he was a graduate of Khalid Hadith from the UK, and he just finished his degree, his bachelor's. And we had this discussion because it was at the time that Sheikh Faleh, which was another scholar in Saudi Arabia, Abdul Haqq would be familiar. But anyway, there was some discord between some of the scholars. And when this thing blew out, it was interesting. I was in the living room with this brother, and he said to me, man, look at how those guys blind follow Sheikh Faleh. you know, how he's wrong now that Sheikh Rabi has spoken about him, And then I looked at him and I said, you know, if we're honest, look how many people blind follow Sheikh Rabi. You know, he was almost surprised by that. Like, what? And in fact, I would honestly say that he kind of fits some of those traits of blindly following the Sheikh, because it was like the only thing coming out of his mouth a lot of times. For me, I can say, for whatever reasons, and others that I know that are Salafi, that was never the case. We love the Sheikh. The Sheikh was an alim, you know, he was, you know, held with high esteem. But as we progressed in our knowledge, all those mashayikh were telling us to take these tools and don't do that. Don't blind follow. That is what Salafi is. And Sheikh Rabi himself, I've even taught some of his books on my YouTube channel, talking about, you know, dealing with fanaticism and blind following, that this is not the dawah. He speaks about that quite, you know, he's consistent with that. But however, individuals are going to do what they do. And another point with regards to that, because you mentioned the ugly side, I don't agree in the sense that, and we both agree that Salafism has no ugly side. But even when you talk about Salafis, because I would say, my argument is this, is that a lot of the people, again, going back to the principle, that have this, that claim to be Salafi, in fact, if we do a tahqiq, you know, we really research and look at what they say, look at what they do, look at all their related to their religion, you'll find that some of those people are not, in fact, Salafi. And so the problem is in the West. We might as well get the cat out of the bag, because we already know, I know where you're kind of who you're talking about. When we talk about groups like what has happened in the West, because Salafi Publications was a big, in the beginning of, you know, in the 90s or what have you, when it was really becoming espoused in the West, they have become a, what do you call it? Like almost a brand of what Salafi is. So when people talk about Salafiyah, this is my problem with a lot of these individuals out there who they claim they're attacking Salafi publications so hard, but you see in their attacks, a lot of their attacks, they're attacking really the dawah of Ahlul Sunnah. They're attacking principles that Imam Abu Hanifa espoused, Imam Malik, Imam Shafi'i. This is where I have big problems with those people in their fervor of wanting to bring down Salafi publications. So what has happened is us as individuals, us Salafis in the West, a lot of us, and non-Salafis have given them the brand. So that's why there's a lot of people who say, well, Abu Khadija did this, Abu Iyad did this, Abu so-and-so did this, so-and-so said this, that is Salafiyah, and this is why we don't like Salafis. But that's big, that's very problematic. There's so many Salafis, so many who are not associated with those brothers. May Allah guide us in them. But very far in, because of mistakes and bid'ah, because of issues of bid'ah, some will go to the extent where they declare those guys as innovators, and some say, well, they are just mistaken. I see that your camera went out a little bit, but
yeah, no, Khalid, I missed all of that and had to go and come back in again.
Yeah,
and
it was more. I was just basically, in a nutshell, just saying that, hey, that we have given them the brand, and I mentioned this in my PhD. Actually, we have given certain groups in the West the brand that they represent the Salafis. So anything that they say as individuals and post on their social media accounts, whether it's Twitter, or Twitter. Whatever they put out there, then everyone says, hey, this is what the Salafis believe, because they also took it by strength. Look how many posts they say, we the Salafis in America and the UK. What are you talking about? There's so many Salafis in the UK who don't agree with what you guys are talking about. So you are not representative of Salafiyah. So they have taken that and we have given it. It's a dual problem. You know,
I hear that. I would agree with you.
In fact, I would say it's a tri problem. It's even because then there's non-Salafis who give them the label. So that's why they say, oh, I know bad Salafis. They looked at me suspiciously in the masjid. I went to a masjid in Birmingham. Everyone looked at me and I just wanted to pray, you know. And I say, whoa, that is extremism. That is insanity. That is Hizbiyah. That is cultism. That has nothing to do with Salafiyah. Plain and simple. Come to our Salafi masjid. We have a masjid in Seattle that, you know, that are for the Muslims. Muslims pray. That's what Muslims are supposed to do 5 times a day. regardless of who they are, as long as you're not coming there making problems. You're not an extremist. You're talking about false ideologies and you want to take over the message, or you want to cause violence, you want to hurt people, whatever, and hurt people with your deviant ideology, then you get no airplay. But other than that, you're a Muslim. Come pray in the house of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because it's Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's house. It's not mine.
Now, alhamdulillah, Khalid, I think to a greater extent we would agree on what you've discussed there. I don't think that from a UK perspective, from maybe, I'm not sure when you engage with these individuals, but no, were they given that brand? Were they given that to take that forward? No, what happened, and I've mentioned that in my Chronicles of UK Salafism, 30 episodes as for those who are aware of it. I go through step by step what happened in the UK context, and what happened is that you saw individuals come amongst Salafis and capitalize upon the disparities and the splitting that started to take place when one of the main organizations, movements, JIMAS, Jamia Ihya Minhaj Sunnah, started to fracture. So they took advantage of that and started pulling ex-members and everything in that particular instance there. So I know them well. I know their leaders and protagonists well. And they developed a cult in that instance because they wanted hegemony in the UK and then the West. And in order to attain that, they started disparaging particular ulama and they started attaching themselves to particular ulama. And let's be frank on this, because some of those ulama, and I include our Sheikh Rabi in that instance, gave more fuel to them, gave them more oxygen, inadvertently, knowingly. That can be debated. We all have different perspectives in that regard, to make them the Frankenstein monster that they became today. But I want to look at the element of, I think, Ahmed Raza, what he mentioned regarding his experience in France. And we're engaging with some of these comments, and he's saying that he didn't know, you don't know a peaceful one among them. And I would say to the viewers in this instance, that's one of the problems that are there amongst Salafis, but it's not only peculiar to Salafis. You need to look at conversion theory. You need to look at other groups within Muslims and outside of the Muslim faith of Islam as well, in that when you see individuals embrace an ideology, a movement, a group, as I've mentioned in my PhD, and I've referred to it here many, many times, they go through a cognitive realization, okay? And I've given 4 stages of that. But what we see with some of those amongst the Salafis in the West in particular, they're kept at the first or second of those 2 rudimentary cognitive development stages. So the first one being the very rudimentary founding stage. Either they've converted to Islam or they've realized that this particular ideology or movement, and they become attached to that movement, and they're very overzealous as they're learning more about it. They then move to the second youthful idealistic phase, in which they want to propagate what they've learnt, and they haven't fully grasped or understood what they are learning and practicing, and they are overzealous in that regard. Now, this happens again in various faiths. The third, the penultimate and final stages are the ones we want individuals to move to, and we all progress to that to a particular extent, unless we are kept in the first 2 stages by those who we are blindly following or adhering to, or the group think mentality that's taking place. And those last 2 stages are the adult, mature, reflective stage, where you start actualizing some of the beliefs and practices you had in the earlier 2 stages. You modify them, you realize you were overzealous, you were too hype, you were misapplying these things in abstract, idealistically. And in the final stage, the 4th stage, being that of wisdom, and that not only being able to reflect and modify and understand the deen and the practice more deeply, but you're also able to impart and advise others not to fall into the same trap, or to beware that they will be going through those 4 stages themselves. With Salafis, and I think a minority, but a very vocal minority, you'll find that they are still at, or kept at, especially by those who are senior to them, and they don't have that independence of referencing scholars, independence of thought, and come from a particular community where they are embracing other Muslims, in the sense that, yes, come into our centers, worship and everything like Khalid described in his masjid. You'll see that they are kept at no matter if it's 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, they are kept at that second stage, dependent upon others to give them what they see as knowledge, and it's not knowledge, it's information, dependent on those individuals, and exaggerating their status in the West because they hear that they've got reference to particular scholars. This is why you will see the behavioral aspects of what we're speaking, that you're describing. I think Ahmed Raza, who mentioned the bad experience, and Sister Kira with what you've mentioned, those weren't Salafis, I hasten to add again, but you'll see that the behavioral aspects of Salafis, of us, and I was once there myself, I dare say, can be very harsh, can be very intolerant in that particular instance. And that is a problem. That is a problem, Khalid, that some of us, but a significant minority of us as Salafis have amongst fellow Muslims, co-religionists, which has earned bad press in that instance. And it's not something that we can escape or shy away from, but it is not the sum total of those who adhere to Salafism, especially today, because a majority of Salafis with a small s, as I've said in my synopsis, the final episode that I delivered last year, many Salafis with a small s are comfortable engaging across the wider community, and that is how we should be. Not that insularity and marginalization away from everyone else, looking with disdain and haughtiness at them being astray and the like. That is a minority, but it's a particularly vocal minority, and that is the ugly side of not Salafism, Salafis in the West today.
Again, that means you're giving them that credibility as Salafis. That's my issue is this, and that's a big part of my thesis, is I was saying, hey, everybody is saying this about Salafis, but I know too many Salafis that are not. I could list right now, I was thinking as you were speaking, at least 6 or 7 du'at, and you would know many more that I know that are totally not on that. And have a whole different, we could talk about so many individuals. I'm just talking about the UK. I haven't even got to America. Yes, and that's my limited brothers that I know that were Tulab al-Ilm. Matter of fact, I can think of at least 9 or 10 right off. I could just rattle back that are totally not on that. So I think there has been, without getting so much into that history, again, there's so much mislabeling, and that's because we get so caught up in those labels. Okay. So there's a lot of, even we do this, that we attribute someone being Salafi who really isn't. Their traits are total Hizbis. I heard of a guy, he came from Damaj. He studied 1 year. This guy doesn't even really know Arabic. If you study a year, what are you going to learn? Comes back to the UK. The brother said he was in the car with this guy. They drove past. There was some brothers from Jamaat Tabligh, and I believe Jamaat Tabligh is a Muqtadiya organization. Let's get it off let's not ice code anything. But the point is, the guy yelled out the window, like doing a drive-by, Muqtadiya, you innovators. What can you say? This is ignorance. This is foolishness. This is a joke. This is not Salafiyya. This is almost it's just a trait of just pure ignorance and foolishness. So it doesn't matter. Even some of the places you studied and all that stuff, those things are all contributing factors to formulating who you are and what you believe. But that doesn't give you any kind of tazkiyah, or it doesn't give you any kind of, and the fact that you claim you're Salafi, or you hang out with some Salafis, or you're loud about your banner of Salafiyya, it doesn't mean anything, no. And that is, and none of those traits have I seen with our ulama. I haven't seen those traits. So that's why a lot of that stuff, and for me, in the early days, I was just like, hey, I'm going to learn Arabic, and I'm going to go to the scholars and the sources myself. And that's why I didn't really know a lot of the stuff, the extremism that was going on in the West. I got tired of those websites. I can't even tell you how many years ago it was that I stopped listening. Why would I listen? I was sitting in the dars with the sheikh. He let me be the reader for Sharh Sunnah. Why would I, what do I need to care about what they said about this one? Because I saw that they were eating each other way back then. There's people, because of brothers I knew in Yemen, a brother said a claim, and then I saw he was on the S pubs back then. It was a forum, And then they started attacking him. And I know what he said was true because I was in the other room. I was literally in the other room, and I was with some other British brothers when this whole thing transpired, and they just discredited this brother, a brother from Ireland, and they just, you know, he's this and he's a liar and he's this and, you know, he's helping the Hizbis. And they were in Birmingham saying this garbage. So the whole point is, I saw way back then, I was like, man, what in the world is this? That is not the Islam and the dawah that I signed up for. Let me learn what it is. So I was, alhamdulillah, favored by Allah in that sense to be able to sit there in Saudi Arabia and benefit from the scholars and go to the books and stuff, because, you know, and so that is very important that we put that in perspective. Another point, one point I have to bring in here, because we're talking a lot about ugly. We have to give some good. Let me give you a few points of good real quick. What have Salafis contributed in the West? And we talked about this last time. Authentic books and translation, a move towards cleaning up the translation, all that garbage from before, just horrible second, third, fourth language. And it's not to knock anybody's language, but there's a lot of people who shouldn't be translating, or this was the quality of translation back then. We'll just say that. That was the model coming from way overseas in other countries, and it was broken, tore up English, okay? So we have more authentic from native speakers and people who had the competency to translate in both those languages and studies, students of knowledge, like we talked about Dawood Burbank, and so forth. So we got the push for authentic books. We also got links to the Nusus, because you hear Salafis, what's your deal? So now that becomes commonplace even in some of the other groups. Well, what's your evidence for that? What is your push? So it's that love for the Nusus, which we should be attached. As our Sheikh said, Imam Muqbil, Dawta Ahl Sunnah, Dawta min Kitabillah ila Kitabillah. It's from the Quran to the Quran, and from the book, from the Sunnah to the Sunnah. So this encourages. Another point, also the love for the link of to the scholars. Of course, the scholars we're talking about predominantly in the East. We're talking about Jordan. We're talking about Saudi Arabia. We're talking about Yemen. We're talking about Egypt, because I believe that's where a lot of the knowledge, especially with creed, is widespread in the correct tawheed and calling to the worship of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Also, we see the push in these societies in the West, the social conservatism. Okay, you see this also from the Deobandis. You see where I live, you'll see Deobandi women that they're wearing niqab. They're not, you know, they represent, you know, but obviously Salafis. So they share that with Salafis, and that they're conservative, you know, and trying to be going as pristine as possible in certain aspects. In socialism, social conservatism. Also, that the push for seeking knowledge. Look at how many people want to make hijrah, how many people want to go overseas and seek knowledge. We've seen that push in the 90s, the 2000s, up until now, that there's such a love for that now. And that is because that has been pushed. That has been a constant agenda, whereas the progressive and the liberals, no, they want you to study in America, in the UK, stay there and study Islam and become a scholar at Oxford, at Cambridge, at Harvard, at whatever, you know, learn a secularized Islam. That's not how you study your Islam. If you want to study political science, that's beautiful. If you want to study engineering, that's great. Those are excellent universities for all those, but that is not how you learn your creed on how to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Likewise, women seeking knowledge. Another point is Salafiyah, you know, it provides the template, and this is what we talked about before, it provides that template in which to judge all these. And that's how I look at it. When I hear you talking about your formative stages and so forth, I'm with you. But I would just say in a very easy nutshell that, hey, we just put that scale up. Let's put that Salafi balance scale. Here it is, boom. And we see that this guy is leaning all the way off here in the takfir. This one is leading all the way off into extreme Sufism and grave worship and it's not shirk to supplicate to other than Allah. And this one is leaning off way out to this. This one is criticizing the scholars of Ahlul Sunnah. So we can say, well, that's surely not Salafi. That's not Salafi. These are traits. These are consistent methodologies these people have, not a one-off. These are consistent. I can name some names of some of those guys in Birmingham and in London and stuff like this who are consistent in their attacks against scholars, consistent against their undermining of principles of Ahlul Sunnah. So we can easily say that, no, they are not from Ahl Sunnah. If you're spending all that time attacking the scholars of Ahl Sunnah and this and that and the other, what's left? So anyway, those are just some of the positives. We can talk about those positive contributions that Salafism, or Salafiyah has contributed. Yes, there has been. I think it's a part of that process, as you said, that formative stage. You can't even. I would say there. Of course, it's blameworthy, but I would say just the fact that this was just kind of the reality of formulating that narrative from a lot of people who didn't really have knowledge. Think about a lot of those early du'at, even if some of them were, a lot of them weren't graduates. They might have went to Jamiat Islamiyah for a couple of years. Most of those guys, and then there were some later that were graduates. Some of them stayed in Yemen for 2 years, okay, maybe 3, some longer. Then, there were others that stayed like 10. I know a brother right now, Shakir, Hafidhullah Ta'ala, he's there, 20-something years he's now got, And my point is, a lot of these guys were not like steeped coffee or steeped shai. They came out, and then, as Ibn al-Qayyim mentions, that it's like the half cup of coffee, or the half, it's not mixed properly. If you don't have enough knowledge, and then you are going way out above your level, and just bringing back, hey, you guys need to know what's your position on Ma'nabi. As I said before, a guy came to a brother who was new to the dawah. 2 guys approached him in like Ohio. So, Ahi, what's your position on, which was a controversy in the East? Because, if you don't speak Arabic, you wouldn't even know any of the literature of this man or the others, or any of the dispute. So he says, I don't know. And they said, Ma salama. So they made hajr of him. Literally like that. He told me when he came to the dawah, and this was a brother who was favored by Allah. He used to be an extreme Sufi when I first met him. He then became a takfiri. He was hardcore. Those are the guys that used to walk around Seattle wearing a sword and stuff like this. And then, alhamdulillah, he came to the dawah to Ahl Sunnah. And this is how people treated him. And that was because of their extreme ignorance and extreme hizbiyah, not even realizing, because they thought themselves they weren't graduates. These guys are just commoners, but they were the tarbiyah they're getting. And it's just ignorance, teaching ignorance upon ignorance. So where are you going to get hikmah from that? Where are you going to get any of those other attributes? So that's why I say there was a lot of damage often caused because of ignorance and fanaticism. We were all eager once we came to the dawah. I thought even when I first went to Yemen and I came back, I had my short thobe. I used to wear imama everywhere I went. I used to wear izar out in public and so, and do my thing, and we give dawah. And the way I dealt with those takfiris, because they were on craziness, but still I wasn't steeped in knowledge, but I just knew a few issues. Those were issues I knew information. I was in my formative stage, even though I had a little bit of lacing of exposure to knowledge, but I was still really at an information stage because my Arabic wasn't strong enough to really get into my books, and I really obviously can't really go to the scholars at that point. So it's a growing process, and I think there's been a shift, and there's been a whole new wave of du'at of Ahl Sunnah that are dealing with the garbage that was dealt with before, and they're raising their communities. We got so many in America.
I agree with you on that.
And the UK and everywhere.
Yeah, no, alhamdulillah. I think there are a number of students who've come back and who are positively impacting their community. So I don't think as I've said, there's a vociferous minority that's there that have sullied what was being done by those earlier on.
We got to move on from them, though.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, true.
Why are we even paying attention? I don't even know what. Every time I'm sorry, let me cut off one thing. I don't even have an idea. I haven't looked at SPub tweet or any of those guys. That's why I don't know. I don't care, and I don't care. I don't listen. Wait. And I don't listen to their detractors. Muhammad Hijab, Ali, whoever, this one, that one. Why do I waste my time? I'm listening to the scholars. I'm trying to benefit, and I'm trying to teach. I don't have time.
Khalid,
how can you spend your life like that?
Good.
No,
that's you. Okay, as a student of knowledge. That's you as a student of knowledge. That's not the ordinary layman. You've got the ordinary layman listening here and listening there.
Yeah,
and
true.
so we have to engage with that. So for example, as you were speaking, mashallah tabarakallah, we've got someone called Ibrahim who's making some statements that are very negative. Okay, and I'm glad that they're coming up there because we engage with them. We've got Ahmed Raza asking how can Salafis be part of Ahlus Sunnah wal Jama'ah. What it shows for those who we're trying to engage and speak to in this particular instance here, I really want you all to be listening carefully here. We're the ones who placed this title here. We're the ones who are Salafi here, and we're speaking transparently. And even as Salafis, we come in different shades and sizes. And those who've been watching these shows see that Khalid and I disagree on particular issues, but not on usul, not on these particular issues in this instance here. And that's healthy. So when you're coming with some of the statements that you're making here, what makes you more informed than those who you're criticizing from the Salafis as being this and being that, the horn of shaitan, the Wahhabis? Salafis are not Wahhabis in that instance there. That's a derogatory term that's used, and that's a regional aspect that's there. I'm not going to go into that now. But how far of you who are asking these questions have you studied? Or are these prejudgments that you have? Are these prejudices? Are these biases that you have? We've got points that have come up from Sister Kira, which was a genuine point of concern, which I'm happy to engage with in this instance there. But some of the points that some of you are highlighting, how informed are you about those statements that you're making? Or is this an emotional impetus that is coming from you because of bad experiences that you've had? I would say as a convert, I don't know about Khalid, and many converts have said this, when we became Muslims, the experience that we had from some of the cultural Muslims and the wider Muslims were enough to make some, and some did, leave the religion. Now, are you going to say, no, Allah decreed it and everything like that, and they went off and everything? No, I can say the same thing to you. Put the shoe on the other foot. Allah decreed the experience that you actually had. We have to look at the essence of what we are discussing. And we are saying there are ugly elements amongst us. There are bad elements amongst us. But when you look at Salafiyah, the question was asked, I think, by one of the individuals. Islam, if we're to ask you Islam and how you understand Islam, I said this 2 weeks ago, we've said this many times, you would say, okay, that following the Quran and the Sunnah as understood by the companions of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the succeeding generation who were with those companions, and that generation that followed the generation, the Atba Tabi'een. And I doubt if any of you would disagree with that basic but rudimentary understanding. So we would then say, okay, they are termed as the Salaf. Those who subscribe to Salafiyah are endeavoring to emulate, refer, adhere to the understanding of those three generations. That's the basic terms I'm going to put it in. I don't want to rehash what Khalid has articulated previously and everything. We do have, again, ugly elements amongst us. Khalid, one of the, not the ugly, but the more negative aspects, I think, or a negative or critique that we should place upon ourselves. And I'm speaking from what I've observed here. As Salafis in the West, we don't engage enough in socio-cultural issues. And I'm going to speak as a convert now. And we can go back to the George Floyd incident and the discussions that emanated from there. And my thing is that a criticism, and you and I may disagree on this, as a black Salafi Muslim, blackness is an element of me that I'm proud of, as I'm proud to be a Salafi Muslim. I'm proud to be a Muslim, okay? And what I've seen, which I find very disconcerting, is those of similar ethnicity, cultural background as me, totally discard anything to do with their ethnicity, black individuals, okay? Totally discard anything to do with their ethnicity when it comes to socio-cultural issues of racism and things like this. However, when we see other Salafi communities or Muslim communities holding on to cultural issues that are important to them, whether they be South Asian, whether they be Arab. None of us have an issue with them doing that. But when it comes to blackness, and blackness doesn't just espouse Muslims in the West, it espouses more generations from slavery and the like, even though we discard the fact that a significant minority were Muslims when they were enslaved and brought over to America and the Americas and the West Indies. That is a problem because we are seen as being detached from wider, pertinent, important issues. And then when we refer to edicts from scholars in their climate, their environment, and transpose those to the West, and they don't fit, then we have some of our Salafi brothers and sisters, African American, African Caribbean, discarding the whole socio-cultural issue of blackness, and that is a problem. You may disagree. That I cannot accept, no, we are Muslims and that is it. Because no, that is not what we've seen from the Deen, and we don't see that from any other cultural community in the West or anywhere else. So why then should we, from the West, discard our blackness? And it's connected to the wider community that is not black, not Muslim. This is a problem.
What I would say here, and this kind of goes back to your funnel of, you know, your model, the one actually that we didn't post here for the session, but we've done it before. I don't know if we're going to have time, but inshallah ta'ala, but we've done it before and we went through that process. I think a lot of that is really, it comes through developmental stages as well, because you've got to think about a lot of the reverts, if they're Afro-Caribbean, African-American, or whoever, or our white brothers and sisters, what have you. We go to Saudi Arabia and we go to Egypt and we go to this and we do whatever scholarship or what have you. A lot of us, especially in those early, you know, our first years, until we realized we were somewhat rejected in those societies and began to grow in our knowledge and grow in our identity, we thought that we needed to discard that. I mean, that is very, very prevalent, I would say. And especially with younger minds. And a lot of us, when we were in our younger stages, I'll give you an example. I remember when I was in Medina, some of the last years, and I still had a lot of my books. I still have them. They're packed, fortunately, all packed away in boxes here. But, and anyhow, I had on my bottom shelf, I had a lot of my, you know, autobiography of Malcolm X and all these other, you know, classic works of my history, you know, because that's interesting to me. I want to know, I need to keep that ties and transmit that to my children, because that is a part, as they say, the root. We don't want to do any Bob Marley quotes or anything crazy, but the point is that the roots of the, you know, there's that tie. You have to know who you are. Okay. You know, we know who we are, but we know that Islam is the precedence. You know, Islam is the highest, but it doesn't. So it's finding the balance, because you'll have some that become so Afrocentric that they'll make claims that Islam promotes nationalism. Muhammad Abdul Haqq was a nationalist movement. This is utter insanity and garbage. It's not mustanid ila dalil. It's not going back to those nusus. It's going back to translations, because you don't have the ability to go back to, you know, it's weird. It's a totally weird istinbat, meaning that you're deriving your narrative from the text. Okay, so we have those extremes. Then we have those who have come to grow and realize the issues of their community and realize, you know, but that was a process, because I know so many brothers that were Tulab al-Ilm, and it's so interesting, those that I have in contact, how their narrative has changed. And that's going from that formative stage, as you mentioned. You know, there was a stage when we were like discarding the issues of our community, or even the point was in Medina. So I had my black collection, or whatever, my historical collection and political science books on my bottom shelf, and all my Islamic books up. And a brother who's African American, he came in and he said, "Ahi, are you still on that black stuff?" And I looked at him and I said, "Ahi, I'm still black." I don't know. I didn't. Yeah, I got some patches here, but I'm black. So it was funny, and the hilarious thing to me is, and that shows he has progress because that was way back then. Now, if you look at his social media posts, he's talking about so many black issues and so many things, and even some of the things are inappropriate. What he's saying, may Allah forgive us and him. You know, going back too much into the things of Jahiliyyah that have no benefit for any of these things. So I think it's a process. It's a process of maturity, you know, because it was even reflected in our dress, whereas now you see a lot of times you don't see me. Even in Saudi Arabia, I wore most of these past few years, I wore shorts most of the time, long shorts, baggy shorts, covered my past my knee, because I was in the gym and I was into that and I wanted that sun and stuff, but I wasn't wearing a thobe as much. I wore the thobe to Jumu'ah, I wore the thobe here and there, because I realized the Saudis also wouldn't let me in their society. Some of them, yes, but mostly you are a foreigner. So that really affected me after many, many years of being smacked in the face. Like, man, I don't even want to look like you guys. You know, I want to be Muslim. Of course, I'm going to do everything halal, my beard, everything else. But I have my own culture and my own identity, as long as it doesn't contradict Islam. And this is where a lot of us as reverts don't understand. As long as it doesn't contravene Islam and the Islamic text, the halal and the haram. So I think the problem is, Doctor, I don't go so hard on the people, but I would say it's a part of that process, because I know a lot of brothers who, like us, went through those stages. They developed, and then they came to that realization, you know, because a lot of them, they really forgot, you know, they had to have the imamah all the time. I used to wear an igal. You know Igal, but I used to wear that when I lived in Haya. When I first came to Saudi Arabia, the first 2 years, I was just like all the Saudis. And I met Sheikh Salih bin Fawzan in Haya. And you know what he said to me? You know, I went, they said, oh, this is Amriki, it's American. He teaches here, Sheikh, da 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 da. So I went up, I shook the Sheikh's hand, and he said to me, he said, SubhanAllah, and in a very Fawzani way, you know, like a conservative, not like smiling really that much or anything, but he just said, I thought you were from Najd. And I said, no, Sheikh, I'm from America, you know, I'm from America. So the point is that, you know, I tried, you know, because that was the environment. So we were really trying to assimilate. And then as we grew in our formative years, we realized, hey, we don't have to assimilate. And I know a lot of students of knowledge. I know brothers that are about to graduate from Jamiat Islamiyya, or some who are graduating, and they've changed. But you don't want to go too extreme.
Yeah,
you know?
I think that goes upon along the cognitive development framework that we've referred to, that I've done in my PhD. What I'm speaking about, in this particular instance now, is back in our society now. And you've got even students of knowledge who are still frowning upon issues of identity as it refers to who we are in the West, blackness in that instance. Brother Liam Brady put up a very pertinent point. He's about getting it, about what happens. Everyone else can speak about their culture. We can't. And our culture comes from blackness, and there's a depth to where we come from in the West in that particular instance. So that's something I think we need to engage and embrace a lot more, because even white converts, to an extent, okay, they are able to still embrace and engage the society that they're in, even though they have a hard time. Some see them as having betrayed their culture. You're a traitor because they've gone over and supposedly gone into an alien faith and fifth column or whatever. But we need to be able to have better conversations, because what has happened as a result of that, when some of the scholars have come, and when some of the books that have emanated that have racist connotations, and we've heard scholars sitting and speaking and giving racist epithets and statements, and they were challenged by some of the black brothers, but others remain quiet. And when I've brought issues, when I was in Saudi Arabia, to students of knowledge, black students of knowledge, saying, I want to take this to scholars, the quoting of some ahadith that are weak and some baseless accusations. I want to penetrate more about the story of Adam being made from black mud. What did that mean? I want to understand that. And the brothers, black brothers, students of knowledge, I say, no, don't go there, leave it. There's almost this sort of passivity in that instance there, as though there's a hierarchy and a pecking order with regards to if you're Arab, you're the most senior, and then it goes down in that. And that doesn't happen at all in my vocabulary and in my environment. I'll be frank with you, living over here or living wherever else. But we see that amongst particular students of knowledge. Not so much, mashallah, some of the students of knowledge who have come out, Ali Davis and others like this, Rajul, strong, firm individuals like this, respected, but they're not all the same. I hasten to add, they're not all the same. So that's an element there. And Khalid, what I want to do, as we're drawing to a close, you referred to the funnel theory, and I think there's an important thing there that we need to look at societally. And I'd ask Hassan, can you put the second of the funnels up as Khalid was referring? I want to very briefly explain about the Salafis' position in and where we are effective in society, because we're not effective across all of society, and we cannot be when we're looking at the dynamics of Western society. Now, that doesn't mean that I'm legitimizing anything else, but it's a reality that we need to look at. So Hassan, can you put up the two-dimensional funnel if you're there? Hassan? I don't know if he's there. He may be busy. So he can't hear what the other one. Okay. There we go. So this is part of one of my frameworks that I developed in the PhD, and you'll see at the top the liberal, very extreme secular Muslim communities, the progressives at the top, where the gravitational pull is very, very weak. Okay, but they serve a purpose there because there are Muslims in the majority at the top, and to some extent the middle, where the mainstream Muslim community initiatives and lie. The Salafis are at that hard end of interventions, the neck of the funnel, where the gravitational pull becomes strongest towards extremism and fanatical practices and the takfiris. And we are and have been at that neck for decades, and we have been effective there more than any other community in the West. Whereas the other communities, as you move up, individuals who are undergoing a reflux, we stop them at that funnel, or they're coming back up from that gravitational pull. They're moving back into mainstream Muslim communities. And some even go to the liberal extreme, like Majid Nawad's Quilliam Foundation, who went so-called from radicalization right back up to the point where he's saying things where even his Islam is being questioned at the moment from some of the statements that he's actually made. That's not me saying that, that's out there. Please take that down if you don't mind, Hassan. So in that instance there, I want to conclude this particular episode, if you like, saying that Salafis, again, I reiterate what I mentioned in the beginning, have been very effective, and an antidote, not just coming from us, Western academics and scholasticism and elsewhere are seeing this in themselves as the antidote and the most effective in combating violent extremism and terrorism. Your book, your PhD, highlights that
topic. That's his topic.
As does mine, alhamdulillah, both of us. This is why we've got the doctor's lab. And I say to the viewers, those who are detractors, those who have had the negative impressions about Salafism, by the Salafis. What I say to you is, yes, some of your experiences cannot be diminished. You've met some badly behaved, some overzealous Salafis, okay? And they're very loud and very unpleasant. But as Khalid has highlighted, as I have tried to endeavor to highlight, there are many amongst the mainstream with the small s. There are many who have graduated, who are doing work, engaging with wider communities and everything that particular instance, and the work and what they're doing in building communities. And they're engaging with not necessarily only Salafi communities that preaching to the converted. No, they're amongst the wider Muslim communities. But we are the most effective. We are the most effective in combating extremism than any community in the West, Muslim community. And it's not just me saying that, my research points to that, Khalid's research points to that, and there's a plethora of academics who highlight that as well. And I'll hand over to Khalid for the last word in this instance. And I hope we've done some justice to showing, look, hey, we're not perfect. And we have issues with fellow Salafis who are on cultish trends, who are on overzealousness, who are on the things that we've highlighted in this particular show. So Dr. Khalid, over to you to conclude.
So I guess I would just conclude by saying that it's very important to really research into things, and especially before we draw conclusions and we make claims, and that we should realize that Salafiyya or Salafism or the Salafi Dawah, that it's a complex set of principles that are based upon a particular orientation towards the Quran and the Sunnah, which is the orientation of Ahl Hadith, the people of Hadith. And this stems from the orientation, the way of the Sahaba, radiallahu ta'ala anhum ajma'in, the way they looked at things. And you could look at this, you could take many points of creed, and then you would put it on those scales to see, how did the Sahaba view the divine names and attributes? How did the Sahaba view Tawheed? Did they go into those issues that we see a lot of the other later day groups and sects go into? And so it's very important to know and have this, to be clear about what it is as a dawah. The second point I would probably would like to end on is that you know, it's very important to, I guess, in general, just to approach this with knowledge and an open mind, you know, to learn and understand, so that way you don't have, I saw some of the people, the few negative comments that I was able to see, that you know, people just making claims and, you know, kind of lump summing things together or going with a particular orientation. But I think it's very, very important to, again, you have a scale. You know, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given us a scale to measure with, and that's the book of Allah. As the Prophet ﷺ said, you know, taraktukum ala bayda, you know, I left you with the, you know, with the white thing, the bright thing. It's night is like it's day. You know, it's clear, and whoever leaves it will be destroyed. And he said, Kitabillah wa sunnati, the Quran and my sunnah. And so, you know, as far as some of those claims, I saw, and I want to end on this. For example, I think a sister mentioned something about, you know, and we've talked about this prior, you know, we're Muslim. Now we're Muslim. But this is something, those names that evolved were names that if you like the companions and love the companions, radiallahu ta'ala anhum ajma'in, you'll find all the way from the time of the companions, the Sahaba and the Tabi'een, those early generations, that they use other names because of the other groups arising. So you'll hear statements from Ibn Abbas, radiallahu ta'ala anhu, you know, saying Ahlul Sunnah. Okay, so this is the reason for those names: Ahlul Sunnah, Ahlul Hadith, Ahlul Tawheed, Ahlul, you know, Salafiyya, as the Salafi, the Athari. All of these names that Ahl Sunnah chose over the centuries, and it was really a response to clarify what they were upon in opposition to what the newly arising groups came about. So when you have Maturidi, Ashari, this name, and this name, Takfi, Khawarij, Qadri, that Ahl Sunnah said, whoa, those people are also saying, they all say they're Muslim, and most of those are Muslim, but we distinguish ourselves. We say we are the people of Hadith because they negate Hadith, they reject Hadith. So they, you know, and they go with their ra'i, they go with their opinions. So we say Ahl Hadith. So I think it requires further study to see why those names evolve, instead of speaking about, you know, that's a very basic, simplistic way of looking at the issue. Well, you know, the Prophet ﷺ didn't say Salafi. I think you really need to study Islam more and really go back and see why Ahl Sunnah, those imams that you respect, what were the statements? Imam Abu Hanifa, Imam Malik, Imam Shafi'i, Imam Ahmed. What did they use? Did they use those terms way back then? You'll find it. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala the Almighty to accept our good and forgive our evil. So I don't know if there was any time for any, I mean, definitely not much time, but I think we did what we did.
No, Jazakallah khair, Khalid, for that. I think that's a very apt point to conclude. I think the viewers can see, regular viewers, Jazakallah khair, the new ones who've come on, we will try and engage with some of these concerns and everything there. There's a note that's come up. Participants will only be blocked for being rude. You won't be blocked for anything else. But for being rude, no, we want to carry ourselves and conduct ourselves with the manners befitting us as Muslims in that instance. And ask the question, ask the challenging questions, make the challenging comments. But we want to do that with a view not to be upholding partisanships or sectarianism in that particular instance. We've got to be, as Muslims, we've got to be transparent, and we've got to be seeking the truth, whether it's something that we find difficult to stomach in that instance, and then we need to check ourselves, or whether we embrace it in an alternative to that, inshallah. So we'll conclude on that. Jazakumullah khair. We look forward to seeing you in a fortnight. Wayak, Sister Kira, thank you for your input today, mashallah, and all of you. And we'll see you in a fortnight, bi'ithnillah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.